All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth session of MobLab Live. Today we'll be talking about how positive narrative wins in a fake news world, which is another interesting topic of the series. I welcome you all to having joined this conversation from different parts of the world and in different time zones. If you are on the chat room, please feel free to introduce yourself. And where are you from? Where do you work on? So that other peers will join the conversation as well. We have an incredible panel of guest speakers who will be talking about their experiences on this particular topic and what's working for them, what's not working, and other work that they're doing across organizations and movements. And before I introduce themselves, as usual, I forget introducing myself. My name is Aprajita, and I work with Mobilization Lab in the capacity of network builder and community connector. Michael joined us for moderating the session, and I will let him introduce himself when he gets into that. But we have Rachel, we have Dawood Khan, and we have Kateryna Kruk who have joined us on the panel. Rachel is the managing director at Narrative Initiative, which is a training and networking resource for leaders and organizations. And they do a lot of work on strategy, narrative strategy, strategic communications with organizational leaders and movements. Dawood Khan has joined us from Pakistan. He's a communication and advocacy strategist. Has done a lot of work on international relations and development sector with different INGOs. And he will be talking about the current protection movement in Pakistan, which has gained a lot of attention in terms of like global media and is very relevant to the discussion that we are going to have today. Kateryna has joined us from Ukraine. She works as a civil activist and a political scientist. She is an analyst at stopfake.org, which is a media firm, and they sort of do a lot of work on reporting fake news, as well as pushing forward positive narratives. So she's going to talk us through the work, that interesting work. And very quickly, I also wanted to just run you through the session flow. So we'll be talking to different speakers and the topic for the first 45 minutes. And the second half of the session will be open to audience questions. So if you have any questions, please type that out on the YouTube chat room and we will pose it to the speakers. Also keep tweeting about your learning so that other people can know what's going on in the session as well. And on that note, Michael, welcome and take us through the session.
Thanks, Aprajita. I'm excited to be here for this conversation with all of you. And yeah, please keep putting in your name, location, your questions. My job here is really to do just one thing, which is represent all of you who are joining in for this conversation in this dialogue. And so we all want to get your questions into the mix, and as we hear and learn from these incredible guests. I work alongside Aprajita here at the MobLab, and as many of you know, we are a network of social change campaigners all around the world looking for what works, looking to improve our skills, our tactics, our strategies, so that we can break through and win on issues of climate, social justice, human rights, a range of our greatest challenges that we all face collectively today. And, that's, as we see it, that's just getting harder and harder. And today's media landscape is more fragmented than ever before. If you're a campaigner, it's no longer possible to reach everyone by getting your or our issue onto the evening news. So we know the internet has introduced, incredible connectivity, but that's for all of us, not just, so it's now no longer an opportunity only for us to reach people more quickly, but also our opponents who are increasingly using as we've seen, false or fake news or counter narratives that challenge the ones that we're looking to introduce. So that's, I think, the opportunity for our conversation today, to figure out not only how do we shape narratives that shift public opinion and drive how societies think and policymakers act, as we've seen some great successful ones, like I'm based here in the US, and marriage equality is now increasingly a norm here as a result of changing narratives and cultural and shifting cultures around how we treat marriage equality. And so we're also seeing, though, around the world examples of where counter narratives are having, and false narratives and false news are having dire consequences that are not positive, and they're not contributing to campaign wins. And many of you are familiar with the I think the now increasingly well-publicized story of the hate speech that was flamed around the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar. And, of course, there are very serious life and death consequences to false narratives shifting and shaping opinion in directions that we don't want to see them go in. So this is a timely conversation for us. And, yeah, I'd argue it's just no longer sufficient for us to be doing campaigning in a way that introduces the narratives that we want, but also, as we'll see, I think, with our guests today, needing to figure out as campaigners what it means to also be prepared to counter narratives and be proactive against opposition narratives, which I think was not something that I recall being a normal part of day-to-day campaigning when I first got started. So what a wild and crazy time we are in. I want to cut myself off here because I want to hear more from our incredible guests, and so let's just get around in. Let's just get some initial comments in from everyone, if we can, all three of you, and we've done some quick introductions, but let's just get a flavor of how you're seeing the world. Give us a sense from each of your perspectives. What are the biggest challenges you are currently seeing when it comes to shaping or communicating a positive narrative? And why don't we start from, let's go to the Ukraine with Kateryna.
So hello everyone, and thanks for having me on this panel, and thank you very much for your introductions and obviously for the question. From our Ukrainian perspective, from the perspective of the country which has seen annexation of the territory and still is in the midst of war, and in the next year we're going to see the round of elections, both presidential and parliamentary ones, so complete change of power once again. The biggest challenge right now for Ukraine is to find this very thin balance between communicating change and positive things and not falling into so-called white propaganda while fighting the propaganda of the aggressor state. So this is the biggest challenge for the state, but also for civic activists, because if you're communicating too much of the positive narrative, you might be seen as whitewashers of the authorities and playing in their own hand, and in a way sometimes even as a coverage of all the bad things that are still happening in the country. At the same time, if you go in too harsh on your authorities and on your country, you're playing in the hand of the aggressor. So I think that for the civil society in Ukraine, the biggest challenge that we've been facing, and this is something that we're still learning, how to criticize or how to show the positive change, but still not go into too diverse poles of the discussion.
Thanks. And what about in Pakistan, Dawood?
Well, I think, as Kateryna said, Pakistan is also going through some very important stages at this time. The general elections are coming. There are some, the important topic of the narrative and movements is all relevant in Pakistan. And the most important, the most daunting challenge to communicate with people in today's world is the partisan nature of commercial and corporate media. And this is one of the tricky issues, that the media becomes, biased and is not fully free in most of the countries, but it is particularly not very free in Pakistan. And this partisan nature of the media leads it to concocting and generating fake news just to support one side or the other. And this scourge of fake news is becoming a monster when it comes to social media, because everybody is enabled now through social media that he or she can create fake news and disseminate it to maybe thousands and millions of people. Because as you know, that the lies spread faster than the truths. So the fake news problem is there, and it is not only one side that is the victim. It is always the every party is the victim of fake news. And what I think is important is that people must know the basics of fact checking and the common sense of how to know that a particular media house, a particular website, or a kind of account or a piece of information is fake. So that basic information is very important. So to me, the biggest challenge is the fake news and the partisan or the biased nature of corporate media.
Thank you. You mentioned fake news. Rachel, you and I both live in a land of a president who has coined that term quite recently. What are you seeing right now as the biggest challenge here at one of the epicenters of? And I think you're coming to us today from Silicon Valley, or near enough to where many of these tech platforms are headquartered. Are you not? And you are still muted, actually, Rachel, so I'll ask you to start again.
I think Rachel's mic is off. You can text her to switch on her mic.
Oh, all right, there we go. Let's try again.
Hi, sorry about that. I'm calling in from Berkeley today, in California. And the biggest challenges that I see are absolutely influenced by my location. And there are two main prongs of that. One is around the platforms of our brains. We are hardwired to pay attention to things that make us afraid, to prioritize fear as an emotion. But that kind of brain platform that we all have leaves us open for emotional manipulation. And that, I think, coupled with the way that online platforms, social media, et cetera, are optimized to drive maximum attention and to look for massive flows of when people are watching and speaking about something. The coupling of where online platforms are now, plus our hardwiring in our own bodies, I see as a very dangerous combination. It's something that we need to find and really build systems to deal with. And I'm really excited about the possibilities of massively networked ways of working, ways of looking at narrative shift that help us to build a big muscle where we can all work together in an aligned way that's collective, that includes many voices. It's not just like one cookie cutter message being stamped out across everything. But I think this combination of platforms allowing for many voices opens up a ton of potential, but we're in a dangerous period that we need to navigate now and find some new systems for ways for people to talk about very difficult things, to avoid spreading fake news and lies, and to build the world that we want to see together.
Yeah, you talk about some of the human elements of this with our brains and what we react to, and I'm curious, is this, while we have some new tools and platforms, of course, is what we're seeing here any different than what we've, than past eras of propaganda, or, hasn't this scenario been the same as what we've seen for centuries, where we have people who have different interests in, dominating a message or narrative? What's different about today? And then I'll come back around to the others here. But Rachel, while we have you.
That's a good question. Propaganda is not new. And mass emotional manipulation is not really new either. They're both things that have been happening in human societies for a long time. But I think what's new about it is the ubiquity of these tiny handheld devices and the read-write capabilities that exist of all of these online social platforms. So I think one of the things that's different, there's a lot of things that are different, but one of the things that's different is that there's a constant emotional tenor that's tied into very physical experiences of interacting with devices, phones, and laptops. So it's not like you're passing an oppressive poster that's in your neighborhood every time you walk past it, which might have been an older form of propaganda, but now it's something that's deeply woven into the fabric of everyone's, or at least a lot of people's day-to-day lives.
So some of the ubiquity. Gotcha. Why don't we go in reverse order here, Dawood, and then Kateryna, what are your thoughts on this?
So who's going to be the first one to answer? Okay, ladies first. So definitely, absolutely agree with a colleague of mine that the biggest change that we've seen is the development of the technology and the fact that, in a way, fake news or propaganda or any kind of advertisement, news, and so on and so forth, they have an ability to reach every single human being. Before that, it was really very much limited to the levels of your status, whether you were able to, for example, yes, to read books or to read posters, were you able to go to the cinema and buy a ticket and watch a propaganda piece, were you able to buy a TV and obviously to watch all the propaganda, like news sets of the state and so on and so forth. And now something that definitely has changed is the fact that every single one of us can be reached not only once, but on different platforms. It became very, very easy. Another thing is that, especially social platforms, they have a lot of information about us. The amount of information that, for example, Facebook, especially Facebook, has on us, this is something no secret service, intelligence service could ever dream of having, about not only particular individuals, but also about, talking about this big data, great amount of people, and allowing to build algorithms, how to influence big amount of people, big number of people. So definitely this is, so I would say that the fact that every single one of us can be subjected to propaganda. And another thing, that propaganda can be pushed, or like fake news, they can be pushed through very different channels. So it's not only social media or news websites or YouTube. If someone would like to get after you, they can get after you on basically every online platform existing possible.
Dawood, do you see it differently or similar?
Well, it is more or less similar because as Rachel moved or waved her mobile phone, this mobile phone has become a kind of, magical device. Or particularly, I personally believe that the advent of this internet and then the social media and interactive platforms, this thing has revolutionized everything. I mean, it is utterly revolutionary and transformative that you are able to talk to millions of people, I mean, just through Facebook, or millions or billions of people can even engage with one sentence that you say. So the challenge with this, advent of internet and social media and the fake news is that it has now found a very fast and magical route of transmission to one another. And a recent MIT study found that lies or fake news move 6 times faster than the correct news, because people have particular prejudices and they want to feed those prejudices, and they want to spread those fake news. So it has become almost a kind of no man's land as to how to handle this monster, as I already used the word monster. So this exponentially large, kind of medium that you are able to exploit, and there is no way to control it in one way or another. So it has, in one way, it is a blessing, and on the other way around, it is also a curse if you look at the fake news side of it. Or just as Kateryna pointed out, that we are not anymore having any privacy or hidden from anybody. So anybody can trick you anywhere, sell you anything, buy you. I mean, anything can happen. So the medium has changed, but the fake news was previously, sort of printed and limited to the books. Now it is everybody's prerogative to just to make up anything and put it on the internet. And if people enjoy it or like it, they will spread it.
Right. It sounds like with the democratization of technology, and we've also seen the democratization of campaigning tools for everyone, regardless of what side you're on, right? So it's the barrier to entry is quite low if you're trying to drive either a positive or something for a public good, or against something that's against it, which is great. Which obviously, creates more work for all of us as campaigners. So if you're just joining us here, we have some great guests here, which we're going to continue to chat with, and you can read more about their bios on the website. But I want to invite your questions through the Twitter hashtag MobLabLive, as well as if you're on the YouTube page, you should be able to see a little chat box on here where some folks and colleagues have been introducing themselves. Continue to let us know where you are watching from on this day, and so we can get a sense of who all is here. But we invite your questions and reactions as we dive in deeper here. So I'd love to go back to you here first, Kateryna, and hear a bit more about stopfake.org and the project and platform you've been working on. You're at the front lines of countering Russian propaganda, which is a global, I think fair to say, a kind of a global issue, not just one for you exclusively in the Ukraine, although obviously you are heavily and directly impacted. Give us a sense, if you can, on how you are countering, you and your colleagues are able to counter some of the powerful Russian tactics and propaganda. How does it work?
So first of all, two big challenges when the Stop Fake initiative has began to work in early March 2014. First thing, that Ukraine was completely not prepared for the propaganda wave from Russian Federation. So in a way, we've become a test field for many techniques that we now see being used in different European countries, seen in Spain, in Great Britain with Brexit referendum, also in the United States, and so on and so forth. But Ukraine back then, when Russia started using their techniques, not only disinformation ones, because in a way, disinformation field was some kind of the coverage which Russia was using while invading Ukraine in Crimea and in Eastern Ukraine. Therefore, Ukraine was incredibly fragile at the moment, and even if we would like to, we simply weren't able as a state to give very effective response to Russian disinformation. Therefore, the civil society in Ukraine, not only Stop Fake organization, but also some other initiatives, to a certain degree, they took the job of the state in debunking some myths, in debunking some propaganda, but also building some platform which is being trusted by many actors. Because in fighting propaganda and fake news, I would say that the biggest problem and the biggest issue is to rebuild trust in use in platforms and in groups of people. Because in the end of the day, if you think that everyone is putting some propaganda, everyone is putting some fake news, and media, as Dawood said, all of them, they have own agenda and put in news and presenting them from the certain angle that represents their editorial policies or their ideological views and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, when you have critical situation, it is incredibly hard to make people trust you and make people believe. And especially when you have war in your country and you have this incredible crisis when, for example, someone is saying that situation in the front line looks this and that, and you have tons of different unknown websites who simply present different point of view, and people are getting lost. And the last thing you can allow yourself, not only as a country in the state of war, but also in the country which would like to move forward, is being very much internally dispersed, not having this kind of internal unity. It really stops you from any kind of progress in your country, no matter what kind of situation you have. That is why Stop Fake, as I already said, in early March 2014, this was the moment when Russia just started sending some military troops in Crimea and started annexation of the peninsula. We've started monitoring what is going on Russian TV stations and what kind of news they're producing about situation in Ukraine, how, first of all, Russian military are behaving in Crimea, because for the first time, mostly in 100 years, ever since the Great Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, when Leon Trotsky, one of the leaders of the revolution back then, said that while invading a new city, the first points that you have to occupy in the city, in the town, or in the village are the postal office and the telegraph. Now we've seen that, for example, this is something that we've also seen in Eastern Ukraine. When they were occupying a certain city, the first point they were going to were TV and radio stations. Only after that they were going to the city administration and other police stations and so on and so forth. So we saw that there is a greater number of information which simply doesn't reflect the reality, which is being online on internet, but also in social media. And another thing which is also, once again, Ukrainian experience, but I think that every single country could also jump into that and agree with that point, is that while sharing different fake stories, the stories that got the biggest amount of attention from another people were the stories that were shared from the profile of ordinary people. So those weren't the classical news or like video shootings made by certain journalists, but the stories which were shared by ordinary people, passers-by and eyewitnesses. So we started simply collecting information that we saw, and immediately the information that got high alert, that's simply too unlikely to be true, we started checking it. And this is how Stop Fake actually operated for a very long period of time. So we've been fact checkers. So every single news which was appearing on mostly on Russian media, and you have the propaganda stars, I would say, that's the news channel and TV channels that like 90% of their content is simply not true, not only about Ukraine, but also about another stuff. And to show people that there can be trust in news, that there can be trust in information that is shared on internet, we've simply been providing check proofs that this information is false, for example. And every single one who was reading our reports could starting from the step one, because we were providing all the links, all the logical map of how we were moving from one point to another. And by doing this, by presenting our methodology, we were also engaging people to become stop fakers and checkers themselves. So that, for example, we don't have a hidden agenda. And when we're saying, trust us because we are the good ones, we were in a way showing why should they trust us and why should they trust our methodology. And at the end of the day, this is something that really very helped. This is something that helped to build the trust in the platform. Because, for example, recently there was a survey which was conducted all around Ukraine, by the specific accent was made on the occupied territories in eastern Ukraine and in Crimea. Obviously, in the territories close to the front line, because in eastern Ukraine we were able to decrease the amount of territories which were controlled by pro-Russian forces. And in a way, they are this, I mean, I know it's very cynical to say it this way, but they are a good sample, because for a certain amount of time, they were living under the propaganda, under the occupational regime. And we found out that, for example, what people in Ukraine paid the most attention to is the source of information. So, for example, what is the website that this information was first appeared on? Or, for example, what is the TV station? And the trust in news was really very much dependent on the trust in the certain channel of information. And Stop Fake, for example, was one of the most trusted ones. So information or debunking of fakes that appeared on Stop Fake, they are among the most trusted sources of information in Ukraine right now.
So it sounds like you've been able to successfully create Stop Fake as a more reliable source of news and information for people in the area and the region. What do you advise? We have a question, for example, here from Michael Roy. What would you advise to individuals or campaigners who don't have the benefit of your platform, right? I guess if we're working in Ukraine, maybe we can send information through you, but what would you tell someone working in another area, maybe who doesn't, a campaigner, advocate on any issue here, that hasn't built up a trusted platform like yours? Is there a takeaway that from your experience or any of your early work that may be helpful for us?
So thinking about building trust in your platform and not starting somewhere out of the blue, this is something really very important. And obviously it takes time, and definitely StopFake didn't build this trust in 1 month. It took us some years. Actually, this is the 4th year of StopFake operating, and only now we see those results of people trusting us and us going into new platforms, because we started as an online platform first, and we still have a website, which is the main channel of information. But currently we're producing, for example, a newspaper for regions close to the occupied territories. There is a radio program. There are 2 language versions of the YouTube channel with our weekly disinformation digest, and we also recently launched a TV program for Ukrainian public broadcasters, so the TV network with the widest coverage in Ukraine. So in a way, and obviously we're active also on social media, and our website has, if I'm not mistaken, 12 different language versions. So this is in a way like going a little bit, using a little bit of the Russian propaganda mechanism, because we're trying to go into different levels of where information is being shared, and try to have our presence there as well. But from my experience, not only from StopFake, because I used to have some projects which were done also for Ukrainian government and Ukrainian parliament from the part of the civil society, because in Ukraine, ever since Euromaidan revolution, which took place in 2013, 2014, Ukraine is undergoing a great reforms, and some of the reforms which also taking place there in the governmental communication, so in the way how state is talking to people and communicating to people. And this was and still is a great challenge, not only for me or for my teams, but I believe everywhere around the world, because authorities as such and state institutions as such, at least in Ukraine, are among the least trusted institutions or like channels of information. So something that we were trying to use different mechanisms, something that is really very unlikely or unusual for the governmental communications. For example, I was a team lead of the Twitter for Ukrainian Parliament for almost a year, and for the first time ever, we've introduced GIFs for the Ukrainian Parliament. So, for example, the information about the fact that the law was passed and the law is about this and this and that, it was supported by a funny cartoon or by the funny picture. And the first reaction was really very much distance, like you are Parliament, how can you do something funny, or how can you engage into discussion with other people? But this was something like thinking out of the box, doing something that was not expected from us. This was something that helped us to build this positive momentum and to show people that the parliament as such is not only about parliamentarians who are hated by people and aren't trusted by, but institution as such deserves trust and deserves some attention. So from my experience, my advice, for example, would be not trying to go to very traditional information campaigns. Always need an information campaign when you start something big, because this is the way to communicate to people and to show them that something is going on. And in age of internet, creativity is one of your golden tickets. You might not have a great amount of money to make video ads, short movies, and so on and so forth. But once again, we have cameras on our phones, and if you have creative ideas, you can build attention first of all to your social campaign. So try to be as creative as possible.
Well, that's a great segue over to Rachel, who has been studying online content and narratives for years now as a campaigner and practitioner. And yeah, maybe you could pick up there, Rachel, and just tell us a bit more about how at the Narrative Initiative are you seeing narratives pick up steam and move? Like, what does it take? What are the elements? What does it take for a campaigner what does a campaigner need to be thinking about if we're going to do some of the things that Kateryna just introduced, building a channel, building trust, building our own content sources in order to influence the dialogue. How do narratives grow and shift today from what you were seeing? What are you advising your colleagues?
There are two things that Kateryna said that felt very important to me. There are actually many dozen things, but two that I'll focus on first. And the first one is that idea that she shared that a lack of trust and unity stops you from making progress at the level of civil society. So I think that's a really good reason of why to do this work. That trust and unity allows us to make the changes that we want to see in the world. And the second thing is a hard lesson to take. And I think particularly it's a difficult lesson to take, at least in the US context of nonprofits. Building trust takes years. That's unbelievably true. So I think thinking about this work as a long haul, multi-year, potentially even multi-decade process, and building systems that work for that. So
even,
the narrative,
even the instantaneous social media world of
it's a continuous process, and it is not instant. So at the Narrative Initiative, I'm out of a campaigner role, and instead operating at this kind of meta capacity building level of helping to build capacity and helping to connect the people who are doing this work to each other to build stronger networks so we can all flex that muscle together. And there are 4 types of capacity, but we're still early stages at the Narrative Initiative. But right now, my kind of working theories around the capacity that's needed to drive narrative change and to build those systems of trust and unity are 4 prongs. The first one is that you have to be able to have the creative vision, as Kateryna was alluding to, the creative vision to see a new narrative that you want to drive towards. So it begins with a creative act. And the second thing is around taking that idea, the big idea of the new narrative that you want to shift to, and reflecting it out through all of your activities. So I think this is not only a communications project or an organizing project, it has many, many implications. So the second thing is just the ability to take that creative idea of a new narrative and enact it, reflect it in all of your activities, which is a big project. And the third thing is really building that muscle, which I keep alluding to, the alignment, the power to be able to drive a narrative. Because even if a narrative is incredibly compelling, if you come up with a kind of magical narrative, it's not going to move itself. You need to, unless you base it on fear, and then our brains and the social media channels are aligned to have that flow well. But if you're trying to create a narrative that's around trust and unity and not around fear, you're going to need a lot of muscle to move that. So the creative act of the narrative, reflecting it out through all of your actions, the muscle to move that narrative in the world. And the first thing I think is around metrics, processes, methodologies to know if you're actually making a difference. That's a capacity that's really needed. In part, I view that as being really important because this is really hard work. And I think minimally, you need really good metrics and methodologies for measuring what you're doing so you can keep yourself and your staff motivated. If you're working on multi-year change across very difficult, very sad types of issues, I think that we need to build in ways to keep ourselves motivated in the work and to show if we're making progress, how we're making progress, and where we can improve. So those are the 4 things that I'm thinking about.
Love that framework, and we'll obviously include that as well as other comments that you all have made in a recap post after this. If anyone's frantically trying to take notes, we'll do our best to summarize this in a blog post afterwards. I'd love to just double back on that second principle, Rachel. So many of us who are part of organizations think of, or have social media, or may think about what you said here as in the domain of a social media implementer or social media expert or comms department, where they do the memes and the communication, right? It's all happens. So say more about what you mean about this being reflected in all this kind of work being reflected in all activities versus say your social media staffer, comms staffer.
Sure. I think this is going to be actually one of the challenges of doing large-scale narrative work is that it's kind of easier to conceptualize if you just think about it as a communications activity. But I think if we just limit it to those kinds of activities, those kinds of channels, we're missing a huge amount of the work that needs done to create real, deep, long-term narrative change and to build that trust. Just like vanity metrics have been popular in social media, in part because they're easier to measure, easier to conceptualize. They may not be the metrics that are the ones that actually indicate the efficacy of your campaigning, but they are kind of like a deep rut in the road that's easy to fall into. I think that we have to be careful when we're thinking about narrative change projects and the practice of narrative change, that it needs to go out beyond communications types of activities. And there's some hard work to do in thinking about how it influences your organizing and other types of organizational activities.
Yeah. Well, I have more questions for you, Rachel, especially when it comes to some crisis response, but I want to jump over to Dawood first in Pakistan and get your sense. As we were just about to start the call, you were saying that, this is reminding us that this is hot times in Pakistan. There's quite a lot, I don't know what folks are following here or not in terms of the movement underway, countering a lot of the state, a very strong state effort to, I think, silence civil society and challenge a number of activists. I'm generalizing here, but maybe you could give us a picture of what you're seeing as a communications and activism expert locally. You have a great, we've been talking about some general principles, but I'd love to get into some, a very specific live case that we have right now, in your backyard, out your window. What are you seeing in this battle, if I can call it that, between civil society working to counter a very strong state force?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, there is this new movement, which is called Pashtun Tahfuz movement, and this movement has come out of this years of crossfire between the armed militants, the Pakistani states, and in some cases, the cross-border attacks, drone attacks in the northern parts of Pakistan. So these people came up saying that we are being affected by this, war against terror, and we have been, brutalized, and there are human rights abuses. At the first, the state was very friendly and accepted their demands, but later on, sort of antagonism developed. And now the issue is that there is a war of narratives, number one. Then there is the war of, media blackout. The people who are on the other side are not allowed to come up on the media. There is undeclared media blackout on them, and they are unable to speak or promote their narrative. So what basically they are doing is they are utilizing the power of social media and internet that I already referred to. And they are, setting an example which is perhaps unprecedented in the history of South Asia, at least, I have not seen in my life or in my adult life, I have not seen such an example. So what is striking and important is that a person from a village with, a university degree is now challenging a very powerful state machinery with his narrative. Because his narrative is powerful simply because his examples, his stories are the kind of stories that directly relate to almost everyone, or if it doesn't directly relate to everyone, it relates to someone they know. So the powerful, positive, and peaceful narrative is reverberating across Pakistan. And what basically is unique in this effort is the use of alternate media instead of mainstream media. So this alternate media, as I already said, that has given voice to a lot of voiceless people and a lot of voiceless movements. The fact that every one of us is talking from different continents on this talk show is, a sort of gift of this internet and this magic of this internet, and they are using this magic to promote their narrative. And to a common man, to a person like me who is studying this movement and looking to these two narratives, a friend of mine said to me, how do you know that this person who is talking about being affected by war, being affected by oppressions, how do you know that he is not an agent of a foreign country? I just said to him that, well, I know him because of his narrative. Whatever he tells is what I know of him. So the day I see something suspicious, of course, I will also start doubting him. So then there is the use of fake news. Again, if I may refer to that, both the parties are saying that they are, being affected. For example, if there is a video, being liked by a lot of people, so the fake newsmakers are trying to make more videos of those sort, which may not be true, and they promote those videos and kind of create a kind of a scenario which is completely uncertain. The one thing that has come out of all these movements and these campaigns and these narratives is that there is a degree of uncertainty among common people who do not have the capacity or tools to know how to verify news. So to me, this is a unique example of promoting positive, peaceful narrative. So far, it has remained very positive and very peaceful, and let's hope it remains peaceful in the future as well. And the important thing is that one article which was published in a foreign newspaper was shared thousands of times, even tens of thousands of times, because of the fact that it was not given the voice here at home. So to me, the last thing that I would say to everyone, and particularly to authoritarian regimes across the globe, is that they should understand this transformation in the way people interact with each other. They should understand that things have changed now. Social media internet has changed everything. The World Wide Web has enabled everyone to make a glossy sort of TV station at his home and talk to people. I mean, they can talk to anyone, anytime. So the governments, the authoritarian regimes need to understand this fact and accept the positive things, the legitimate things, the things that are, constitutional, that are relating to basic human rights. So this will create a perfect and peaceful world, I think. So I'm happy to address any additional questions if you have.
Yeah, I mean, I love your optimism here. It gives me some hope, and we're seeing a few questions from fellow campaigning organizations who work with activists, like many of your colleagues in different parts of the world, and whether it's Pascal here at Save the Children or Palika at Witness, we have some others who I think are asking some related questions about what should we tell activists? What advice can we give to folks who are feeling quite, feeling the pressure of feeling the pressure of fake news, being bombarded with counter narratives. Is it, what I'm hearing you say is that positive news, that there's something powerful simply in the positive nature of trusted positive news? But I guess what advice would you give to those feeling, overwhelmed and like we're losing these battles, like in contexts like yours?
Well, I think there are a few things they should take care of. Number one, which is being tested by time, is that people should remain peaceful with their narrative. I mean, the moment a narrative or the moment a kind of movement turns into violence, then there is always an excuse for the other side to crack down against them or do the opposite or bring about the fake news. And they should have the capacity and understanding to technically use social media in such a way that they have a singular platform from where they can give their own. For example, if I may quote this moment in Pakistan, when it started this year in January, there were hundreds of groups and pages that were named with this movement, but they were not, operated by the people who are behind this movement. But if there is a singular platform, the people know that this is the narrative and this is the counter narrative, then it will work positively. And as I said, that the peaceful nature and the positive nature of the narratives is very important. It works. It has worked in the case of Nelson Mandela. It has worked in the case of Palestinians, and a lot of other cases are there where we are seeing that the peacefulness of a narrative is very important. So what I would say is that the social media is one way, and the other way is the instant messaging apps and the new things that are coming up, like the one we are now talking over, the virtual spaces that we are having available to us from various platforms. They should all be utilized, including websites, static things like website where they can put up their, just as Kateryna said, that if you do not have any expertise in making particular videos or very expert or professional videos, you can make, sort of very amateur videos by your own workers and put them on the internet. You do not, you do not know which video is going to go viral and which video is going to attract people. So this is what I would say to the people. And one more last point I would like to make here is that it may be surprising for you that we in Pakistan are yet to develop a culture for reasonable dissent and a safe zone for enabling meaningful debate on issues affecting people's lives. So it is important that people play their cards very carefully so that their public or the activists are not affected, and at the same time they are able to promote their positive and peaceful narrative.
That's great. Yeah, we know there's a whole nother conversation we can have about closing civic or democratic space and spaces for free speech at all. That comes in parallel to this conversation about the content. I guess that, maybe for you or Kateryna as well, or anyone really who wants to respond, one element we haven't touched on much here is something Matt Fitzgerald brings up here about bots and I would expand to other technologies. A lot of, we've talked about how to introduce our own trusted channels, our own trusted narratives, and whether they're positive or negative. But what do we do in the face of more advanced technology? Does that, how do we, when we're being drowned out by bots, for example, or some of the artificial advantages, perhaps, that increasingly opposition narratives are deploying? Do we need to have the same tools in place, or is that a distraction? And maybe we'll just, Kateryna, I'd love to, since you've worked very directly on, you've been battling bots directly. I'm curious your perspective.
I have a long experience with bots and trolls, and even before knowing what the Twitter bot is and how they operate, and I've been attacked by them. So my first personal advice to everyone, every campaign which is being attacked by bots, don't let them get under your skin, because in the end of the day, there are two types of bots attacks. So bots who are attacking personally you and swearing and writing nasty things about campaigners and the organization and so on and so forth, and trying to destroy your credibility, not only in the organization, but your credibility in yourself. And this is something which, on a human level, this is something really very hard to handle, because the moment you lose your faith in what you're doing, and you become even a bit afraid of going on internet and reading nasty things about you, you've lost not only for this campaign, but also for a longer period of time. But then the second type of the attacks of trolls and bots is the attack which is being centered on the things that you are saying. So for example, they can build some false narrative or produce different 20, 30, and so on and so forth, different versions of the events that you're writing about, and so on and so forth. And I would say that in the case when you're attacked by trolls or bots, the moment you see it, you have to be public with your audience. You have to say that you're under attack, because mostly in Ukraine and here in Europe, the fact that you're attacked by Russian trolls, in our case, obviously there are different types of trolls and so on and so forth, and political bots, which is being a growing problem for different European countries, because a lot of politicians in Ukraine and also in other countries in Europe, they simply learned from Russian experience, and there are bots, political bots, farmers which are being produced and harvested in a way in different European countries. But the moment you're being attacked by the troll or by the bot, it means that you're doing something meaningful, and in the end of the day, it means that you're doing something right. So my advice would be not to keep it within your small team and thinking, oh my God, how can we fight it? In the end of the day, you can't, because it's about the amount of the bots that can follow your accounts and so on and so forth, and write comments or share it, and obviously comment with some nasty stuff about the things that you've shared. But telling your audience, your targeted audience, first of all, that look, there is something going on against us. In the end of the day, especially in Ukraine, this is something that we've seen many times. This is, in fact, something that can boost your credibility, because being attacked by a pro-Russian troll means that you're doing a right thing. And doing the right thing, this is the message that we would like to get across our audiences, just before that, the special narrative that we would like to share.
Rachel, you've also, thank you for that. Rachel, you've also been working on some crisis response work, and I'm curious would you agree that that an attack is actually an opportunity? And we're in our final few minutes here, everyone, so we're going to ask for your tight responses, and we'll wrap up shortly. But yeah, give us a quick thought or a tip on using attacks as opportunities when thinking about narrative or communications.
Yeah, I agree that any kind of attack or crisis is also an opportunity. It's a moment where there's a big potential for change. And it's an opportunity for a couple of different kinds of things. It's an opportunity to get the facts right, to have a return to a kind of common sense around what's going on. I think one of the strongest opportunities is around, in that kind of situation, in building common ground. People talk a lot about finding common ground. I don't think it's something that you magically come across. I think common ground is very actively built, and there's a strong opportunity for building common ground, shared understanding of what's going on in a moment of crisis. I think a second way of looking at a crisis as an opportunity is that it's a huge opportunity to build that muscle that I keep talking about, for collective aligned action. When the house is on fire, hopefully your neighbors will jump in to help you out. That's a moment of common humanity. And once you've worked together with your neighbors to put out this metaphorical house fire, you have a new platform and a new way of working together that you might not have had before. And that's an opportunity to build, probably going to take years. So every time there's that opportunity and you have that experience of working together, find ways to keep what you've built and continue building.
Thank you, and a helpful reminder there that this is not something that we can expect to turn around overnight. That this is a muscle that we need to be, a helpful analogy here, that we need to be thinking of this as a muscle, and that's a lot of what we focus in on, thinking about at the MobLab with different partners about how do we shift the cultures of our organization so that we can be a little bit more nimble and adapt in these contexts. It's not a switch you can flip with downloading a tool overnight. Is definitely a takeaway I'm getting from this conversation. We are unfortunately approaching the end of our time for a conversation that I think we could have probably had for a couple hours, and I'm hoping that we can still find ways to continue online through Twitter with each of you, and with a recap post that we're going to put together and consult you on to make sure that if there are any additional comments or resources for our participants that we missed in discussing, whether from you, Kateryna at Stop Fake in the Ukraine, or Dawood in Pakistan as the situation there unfolds in the with the movement you're following, and of course Rachel with all the work you're doing at the Narrative Initiative. thank you all for taking this time and finding a stable connection in wherever you are, and Aprajita for bringing us all together and for organizing this great session and conversation, which I just learned a great deal from. So thank you all. Please stay tuned for we are doing these conversations monthly and as regularly as possible, and we are updating folks through our email list at mobilizationlab.org, and that's going to be the best place for us to keep in touch. So thank you everyone for joining from all around the world and for your questions and comments, and looking forward to continuing this conversation with everyone. So a big virtual round of applause and high five. Hopefully you can feel the response from everyone without their videos, and you can send your applause through chat here. But once again, a big thank you to everyone, and we will see you in a few weeks or next month.
Bye.
Ciao. Thank